Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Ronan Murphy and I'm delighted to be joined by Robin Bairner for an extra special Transfers podcast extra.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Ronan. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so this week you might have heard one of our recent transfers specials. We covered Barcelona's 5 worst and 5 best transfers of the 21st century, but this time we're launching another different series, and this one is looking at some of the biggest transfers of all time, the most important transfers of all time. So where better to start than with the biggest transfer of all time? So yeah, we're going to look at Neymar this week and on the transfers special. So Neymar, the transfer to PSG happened in 2017. Obviously, it shook the world, but I know it kind of had a birth a long time before that, Robin. It's not just in 2017. This transfer was years in development, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this whole deal really goes back to Neymar when he initially joined Barcelona from Santos because of the construction of that deal. And it was kind of fueled by this initial transfer from Santos to Barcelona. Now, if you go way back to the start of Neymar's career, he was initially meant to join Real Madrid, but Barcelona came in and hijacked that deal. They paid 10 million euros just to have a first option to sign him. So there's been a lot of controversy and a lot of talk about Neymar right from the beginning of his career before, many people in Europe had probably even seen him play. So the deal basically that took Neymar to Barcelona was constructed in such a way that a huge portion of that Barcelona paid around 80 million to sign Neymar. Around half of that went to Santos, and another half of that went to a company called N&N, which was owned by Neymar's father. And the fallout from this is that Neymar was charged in Brazil for tax fraud. Now, this didn't come about until a few years later. It caused a whole huge host of political ramifications at Barcelona, including the resignation of then President Sandro Rosell. And the fallout essentially was that Neymar feels that he should have been better supported by Barcelona in this case, and he felt that the club didn't have his back, and he wanted compensation for kind of what he had been through legally. He didn't get the support that he wanted, and in November 2016 is when we see the initial reports of Neymar starting to become, kind of unsettled at Barcelona and really sort of agitating for a move. Now, at this stage, it was Jose Mourinho's Manchester United that seemed to be big players in this move. They saw him as an ideal replacement for Wayne Rooney, whose star was falling quite considerably at that time. But PSG, we also see, were kind of growing in their interest for Neymar now. And Neymar too was also kind of agitating for a bigger deal. He wanted to be seen as a player on the par of Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, and he wanted a wage at Barcelona to kind of match that, but Barcelona were struggling to kind of fund that. So there was a whole load of ramifications and things going on in the background, even at that stage.
Yeah, I think kind of we had heard at the time, maybe there was interest in Chelsea as well, Manchester United, the interest was big, and it was no surprise Neymar was one of the best players in the world at that time. Barcelona had the best attack in the world, the best attack the football world had seen in kind of in the 21st century, in that MSN attack with Suarez and Messi. And Neymar, I suppose, when you look at the statistics at the time, he seemed to be third fiddle in that, because Suarez was obviously getting a lot of goals. Messi, he was getting all the plaudits and all the awards. Ballon d'Or coming out his ears, I suppose. Ballon d'Or, I should say in French. But yeah, Neymar, he was second fiddle to Messi, and maybe third fiddle with Ronaldo in it. So he wanted to be the biggest player in the world, and yeah, he can see why he needed to leave Barcelona for that to happen.
The interesting thing is that Neymar signed a new contract for Barcelona just a matter of a matter of months before kind of all this blew up. And, that was designed to kind of placate him. But at the time, it was described by sources close to Barcelona as just being a sort of sticking plaster for the issues that were going on in the background. But for sure, that Neymar, publicly at least, wanted to move to PSG because he wanted out of the Messi shadow. He wanted to grow his own status as a player, to become a Ballon d'Or winner, and to really be acknowledged as the best player in the world, someone who could match your Messis and your Cristiano Ronaldos.
Yeah, that definitely wasn't going to happen at Barcelona. And then kind of we see in July 2027, reports come out in some Spanish media that PSG are ready to pay the 222 million. And obviously that 222 million ties into that contract that you've talked about, that was his release clause in that recent contract that he signed that pushed it up to 222 million euros. And the Diario Sport in Spain as well, it was saying that Neymar's uncomfortable being second to Messi. Barcelona came out and denied the reports that Neymar was going anything. And then kind of a day later, after these reports come out in the papers, it seemed to be that this move looked to be on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's worth stressing just the sheer value of this deal. I mean, you talk about the £222 million release clause, but on top of that, you've got to remember that because Neymar had to trigger this release clause himself, so he had to physically pay the money to Barcelona himself. And because PSG had to give Neymar the money first, that meant they incurred an extra 90 to 100 million euros charge via French taxes on top of that. So, you're kind of looking at 330 million euros already. On top of that, you've got Neymar's wages, which were estimated to be around 300 million euros over the course of 5 years. And you've got around 50 million euros compensation to the player's father. So, the value of this deal is astronomical. It's way over €500 million. And it was financially driven. Barcelona quite simply couldn't match that. His father, Neymar's father, became known as Napalm in Barcelona because of the kind of way that he would just push everybody aside and make these huge demands. So it was a bit complicated for sure.
Yeah, so then a day after those reports came out, the 222 million transfer looked to be happening, or 500 million transfer, $500 million transfer maybe. That came out that there was a journalist, Mario Belcher, he was getting ready for dinner when he was called with information that PSG were going to pay the money to sign Neymar. And then it kind of steamrolled from there. It was a case that his Instagram account, he had to make it private because he was getting so many comments. I imagine some of them were unsavory comments from fans worried that Neymar was leaving Barcelona and he was making this stuff up. So yeah, it was at the same time it was kind of happening that Barcelona were going to America, the US, to play in the International Champions Cup. And then we at the time were working for a publication that were one of the brand kind of partners for the International Champions Cup. So it was a wild experience at the time. It was the case that every sneeze that Neymar made, every conversation he had, everything he did was captured on video. We were reading so much into everything that he did. PSG, obviously, they considered him the kind of the white whale they were trying to catch because they wanted Ronaldo or Messi, someone like that. Ronaldo obviously was declining in years, he was getting older. They thought he wouldn't be as good as he once was. Messi was seen as untouchable, but Neymar was someone they could get. And in Barcelona, that's all the circus that followed around in the US was, is Neymar staying? Is Neymar going? What's happening?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Neymar had agreed his terms with PSG as early as July, so this had been in place for a fair amount of time before the deal actually was pushed through. But Barcelona were absolutely insistent that they would not sell Neymar. Now, Jose Maria Bartomeu, who had taken over as president by Sandro Rosell, went very public and said that Neymar wouldn't leave. there was a vice president at Barcelona, said that they were 200% sure that Neymar would be going nowhere. So Barcelona were, they had a very, very strong line that Neymar would go nowhere. And presumably this was fueled by the belief that PSG were kind of calling their bluff on the 222 million release clause. But as it transpired, that was not the case. And, the deal was eventually pushed through.
Yeah, I suppose that 222 million and the $500 million you're saying earlier, it has to be put in context that this absolutely smashed the world record transfer fee at the moment. It wasn't the case that we had 180 million on the cards or something before. It was this 222 million seemed like a crazy amount of money at the time. We had only recently passed 100, or we hadn't even passed 100 million euro or 100 million pound. It was Paul Pogba's transfer fee was the record at the time. So this kind of was totally eclipsing that.
Yeah, I think it's at this point it's worth introducing a quote from Jose Mourinho, who said, speaking to ESPN Brazil, he said, "A club like Barcelona cannot and will not lose Neymar." So it was an unthinkable deal, basically, because everybody had seen the sort of the financial power of PSG in previous years in terms of getting the likes of Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Thiago Silva, to a lesser extent Javier Pastore to the club. So PSG had flexed their muscles and had kind of shown a taste of what they were capable of. But this was really bringing PSG's project into a whole new level in terms of their spending. And as you mentioned, it just completely transformed the whole of the transfer market in terms of the landscape at the time, because it made people appreciate just how financially strong the state-owned company, the state-owned clubs could be.
Yeah, and at the time as well, Qatar were trying to make a huge splash in world football. Obviously, they had won the World Cup hosting rights for 2022, but at the same time, a blockade was going on between Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, and Egypt. The Qatar was a diplomatic kind of blackout essentially for them, that they had been accused of supporting terrorism, and some of the other states around them didn't want to kind of deal with them. They weren't dealing diplomatically, they weren't dealing with financially, and this was something that Qatar at the time could do, maybe away from all that, to kind of distract from all that or put their money somewhere else, and they weren't able to kind of work with some of their Arab neighbours, so they were kind of making a big deal in Europe and through PSG, and they were able to spend all this money. They kind of, like you said, they changed the landscape of football, but as it was happening, people still didn't believe it was happening. Gerard Piqué posts a famous or infamous photo. He's staying in the caption, but that turned out to be a complete lot of nonsense. There was all videos of Neymar with his dad before and after matches, and all the while this was going on, Barcelona were playing friendly matches in this International Champions Cup. They were winning these friendly matches. Neymar was scoring in these friendly matches. It seemed like, yeah, this is just going on in the background, but is it actually happening? And Barcelona even beat Real Madrid 3-2 in Miami in a Clásico in America. The new coach, Ernesto Valverde, had just come in. He had obviously said so much in the media. He doubled down on the fact that Neymar was staying. The team was finished in America. It was going to fly home. But Neymar wasn't on the flight with the rest of the players. He was going to China for promotional requirements, Barcelona's promotional requirements, must be said. But en route back to Europe, he stopped off in Dubai, and you can bet there was plenty of speculation about him stopping off there on the way back. And it was then the papers were even speculating, the media, we ourselves are speculating, where would he go next? Will he fly to Paris? Will he be back in Barcelona? What was happening next? And the next thing that happened, he was in the Barcelona offices telling them goodbye.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, it's probably something that they would have maybe not predicted, but the relationship between Neymar and Barcelona at that time had been frosty for months and months. Obviously, because of the background I explained earlier, but equally, the relationship at that time was complicated too, because Neymar was under pressure, for example, to post on his social media that he was staying 100% at Barcelona, and that's something that he refused to do. So I think even at that time there would have been, a strong feeling at least that in Barcelona that losing Neymar was possible, even if their public-facing front was saying a very different thing.
Yeah, I think behind the scenes, it was definitely the case that Barcelona were beginning to come to terms with this, that this was happening. It was just a formality. And I think they were trying to convince him perhaps he could stay, that they were hoping that he would stay. They were hoping that PSG wouldn't pay this money. But then August 2nd happens and they're meeting in the offices that I mentioned. Barcelona released a statement. The player, Neymar Jr., accompanied by his father and agent, has informed FC Barcelona this morning of his decision to leave the club. But in that statement, they insisted that the 222 million release clause would have to be paid. And the 222 million isn't something that Neymar was carrying around in his back pocket. And as Spanish rules go, you have to pay it yourself. So there's a photo had emerged after of this check. And it's just crazy to see a 222 million check for a football player from that football player.
Yeah, it's just one of the iconic images of football transfer history, I suppose, will be forever that check. And, Neymar himself would have landed a pretty big check after that in terms of his signing on fee. And his father certainly did, because as I mentioned, he had this enormous commission on the deal. So, the Neymar family, there was a huge financial incentive for them to move to Paris. And that kind of only fueled Napalm's reputation at Camp Nou, I suppose.
Yeah, Napalm is just a fantastic pun. I absolutely love that. Yeah.
As a connoisseur of plunge yourself, I knew you would appreciate that one.
Yeah. If I take anything from this episode, it will be that pun of Neymar's dad. And maybe Neymar can inherit that name, just like he's inherited his father's name in other ways.
Napalm Jr.
Yeah, Napalm Jr. Yeah, so then the next day after that Barcelona statement, PSG made their own statement. Neymar had his medical in Porto. PSG announced that they were signing Neymar. La Liga president at the time, Javier Tebas, he called out PSG for this. He said they were financial dopers. He wanted to report them to UEFA, even to the European Union, for breaking financial fair play, or claiming they were breaking financial fair play, because this money, how would it fit in with financial fair play? It didn't seem to add, the numbers didn't seem to add up, at least from La Liga's point of view, that where was this money coming from? But like we've talked about, this was a Qatari-backed club. There was obviously a lot of money coming in from Qatar, so they could afford this. It wasn't like they were looking down the back of the sofa for coins to pay this Neymar check. It was just that, it was going to be hard for it. And Barcelona later on, they just confirmed the amount and what was happening, that 222 million, this transfer had happened. And two days later, Neymar arrives in Paris.
Yeah, I've just got this image of you at home now, searching down the back of your sofa for 222 million euros. But it's just an extraordinary deal. And Arsene Wenger said at the time, once a country owns a club, everything is possible. And I guess that kind of encapsulates, what happened in this deal. You mentioned the financial fair play implications. We know now that ultimately UEFA were toothless in upholding anything against PSG. And in any case, even at that time, because there was the financial fair play was based on rolling losses of 30 million euros, PSG knew that the first time that they could have been punished would have been the 2018-19 season, which would be a couple of years later. And of course, at that time, it was only a few weeks later that PSG then went out and spent massive money on Kylian Mbappe, which ultimately proved to be a better deal. they kind of circumvented FFP to some extent in this case by loaning him with the obligation to buy, I believe, if they weren't relegated from Ligue 1, so they were effectively buying him, and then transferred the money the following year. But it just shows how PSG really blew up the transfer market that year.
Yeah, and at the time, Neymar in that press conference, the one that it was kind of shown around the world, probably up there with Messi's when he was kind of announced in PSG years later. He kind of said that it wasn't about money. One of the quotes he made was, "I have never been motivated by money. It's not my primary concern. I always follow my heart." His heart, I suppose, like you said, was to become the best player in the world, to be considered to be the best player in the world, which he wasn't going to do about Barcelona. But the money certainly helped. The PSG president as well, he was kind of, obviously, this is our new shiny toy. He has to say it. He has to say, this is why this best player is here. He said, I'm very happy to present our big star and idol to the whole world. We always wanted Neymar. He's the best player in the world, and now he is ours. I mean, he also mentioned that it wasn't just revenge for Barcelona trying to sign Marco Verratti, because that was kind of one of the stories at the time, that PSG are only doing this despite Barcelona. But obviously that was complete hokum, because if you had the chance to sign Neymar, and at the time, everybody wanted to sign Neymar, like you said, Man United, Chelsea were interested. Why wouldn't PSG want to sign Neymar? He was one of the best players in the world in 2017.
Yeah, absolutely. And just touching on the whole sort of contract and wage issue there, it's worth recognising that at the time when Neymar was leaving and pushing to leave Barcelona, he was kind of only in their sort of second-rate players in terms of their salary structure. Whereas going to PSG, he suddenly became the best paid player in the world. So now he was getting paid more than Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. Messi would quickly sign a renewal at Barcelona following this, that subsequently made him the best player in the world and caused ramifications at PSG the following summer, when Neymar all of a sudden decided he wanted to leave and might go back to Spain or whatever. But for Neymar, it was certainly a big step, probably in terms of his ego, to say that he is now the best paid player in the world. And I think certainly that has to have come into his thinking, because he felt that he was very much kind of treated as a second-rate player to Messi and to Suarez at Barcelona. And of course, he hadn't come off the back of a particularly great season at Barca. Obviously, Barcelona had just completed their incredible comeback against PSG in the last 16 of the Champions League, when PSG won the first leg 4-0 and then were subsequently blown away 6-1 at Camp Nou. But for Barcelona as a whole, that previous season had been a major disappointment. They had got knocked out in the Champions League at the quarter-final stage, and there was a sense that the club needed rejuvenated at that point. And I suppose Neymar's money should have gone towards doing that, but ultimately it went to the failed transfer of Philippe Coutinho and a whole load of other failed deals there.
That kind of ties into Jose Mourinho, his quotes at the time. Obviously, you mentioned Arsene Wenger's quotes, but Mourinho was talking about whether Neymar was expensive, and he said for 200 million pounds, he was talking, because obviously he was the main manager at the time. For 200 million, I don't think he's expensive. I think he's expensive in the fact that you're now going to have more players at 100 million, you're going to have players at 80 million, and more players at 60 million. And I think that's the problem. And that kind of was the problem. We saw that Barcelona, they had no choice but to go out and spend money, and they bought Ousmane Dembele, who is now lighting it up for PSG, ironically, and and Philippe Coutinho, who on the top 5 and bottom 5 transfers of the 21st century, our good friend Mohamed Butt called him perhaps the worst transfer of all time. So yeah, it was not a good place to be for Barcelona with the money they spent.
No, absolutely not. And the sort of ripple effect from this, of course, was that this provided Liverpool with money to go out and spend money on the likes of Van Dijk and Alisson. So Liverpool have kind of constructed their whole current team and the whole generation of success under Jurgen Klopp based on this Felipe Coutinho deal. So, Neymar to Barcelona to PSG, has been, it's been great for Liverpool purely because Barcelona then had to go out and buy Coutinho for this enormous sum of money. But you have to say that Barcelona have really frittered away that huge sum all too easily and really didn't get much success from the huge amount of money that they got.
Yeah, Coutinho is obviously iconic. Barcelona memory is playing for Bayern Munich, and so Liverpool on the other hand, what great business they did, and Graham Souness came out and he said that selling Coutinho was the best bit of business that Liverpool have ever done. So that not buying Van Dijk or not buying Alisson, it was selling Coutinho is what set Liverpool up for their period of success, and what a period of success they kind of had after that, and
still have, to be fair.
Yeah, of course. And Coutinho didn't have a great success. Dembele obviously didn't have great success at Barcelona. And Neymar at PSG, well, things probably could have went a bit better for him, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, Neymar at PSG really started to unravel pretty quickly. Having gone there with such fanfare and having been presented with the biggest contract in football, it's perhaps not unsurprising that his ego was somewhat inflated, shall we say. And really only a matter of weeks at PSG that the controversy really started to follow. For example, he had an on-field spat with Edinson Cavani over a penalty that almost came to blows, and the ramifications for that were quite significant, in that Neymar fell out with Cavani off the field. Cavani was ultimately offered money by PSG not to take penalties, allegedly. So there was this controversy started almost immediately, and would continue to follow him throughout his PSG career. For example, he very quickly emerged that he was wanting to pick and choose which games that he wanted to play, and he became upset with head coach at the time, Unai Emery. He was upset with Cavani, as I said, the style of play, and that he felt he wasn't being given the privileges that he deserved in his position. And these privileges were essentially being able to pick and choose which games he would play. And in the fallout of the Coutinho incident, Neymar was officially missing with a minor muscular problem for 2 or 3 matches. And, this has been something that's dogged Neymar throughout his career. Famously, he has missed a succession of matches around his sister's birthday. And this led Sergio Ramos, who eventually joined PSG, to tell Cadena Ser, while he was still playing with Real Madrid, "I like to play with the best. Neymar is one of them. What we need to negotiate is his sister's birthday." So that kind of sums up Neymar's whole attitude. And beyond that, of course, you've got issues with injuries, and Neymar consistently missed big matches for PSG because he was injured. The sort of crunch time in the second half of the season, which is essentially the time where PSG bought him to make the difference, particularly in the Champions League. He missed a succession of knockout matches because of broken metatarsals in successive years, and just didn't live up to the billing that was expected of him. Now, to be fair to Neymar, this wasn't entirely his fault. He wasn't particularly well protected by referees in Ligue 1, and I think that's a contributing factor to the 2 injuries that he suffered that saw him miss out on the Champions League. But, there's no doubt that his attitude was immediately questionable in Paris, and it was kind of summed up at the end of his first season when he infamously sent an Instagram post of him playing poker while his teammates were winning the league. And then it emerged very quickly that he was attempting to force a move back to Spain. He was trying to engineer a pay rise because to stay at PSG for a second year. This seems to have been triggered by Messi being paid more than him now at Barcelona. So there's a whole lot of these incidents that have really checkered his career at PSG.
Yeah, one of them, as well as a picture of him playing poker, he obviously missed the league awards. He was partying with Rihanna instead at the time, so that emerged too, and it didn't reflect well on him. And in that season, the first season, he obviously won lots of domestic trophies, but the Champions League evaded PSG. He was bought for the Champions League, like you said. That move to Barcelona was back on the cards. He was photographed as well. He was on holidays with Messi in Ibiza. He was injured for Copa America. Leonardo came back in as a sporting director of PSG, which was talk that maybe Leonardo would let him leave. I'd be happy enough if they could recoup the investment that they had made on him, if they could get the money back from him. But it seemed that Barcelona couldn't afford to pay it. They were, after buying Griezmann at the time, they had to take a loan to pay Griezmann's 120 million euro release clause. They had to get out a loan for 35 million worth of it. So it was never a case that they were going to be in a position to sign it. And they even made swap deals with him. They made a loan to buy deal for him. That wasn't the call wasn't even returned by a PSG, or the offer wasn't. They didn't even acknowledge the offer. It was the case that Barcelona couldn't really afford to bring him back. They obviously wanted to bring him back. It would have been great for them to bring him back, because, like we said, Coutinho was a massive flop, but they couldn't afford to bring him back, and PSG were kind of stuck with him. And for the next few years, then he was absent for big games because of the injuries that you said. He missed 119 matches across 20 different injury breaks over 6 years at PSG. So when it came to time to renew his contract, even though Messi had arrived and come in the meantime, Mbappe, Messi and Neymar did not live up to the expectation that many expected, that maybe this would be the new MSN. But when it came time to renew his contract, or to allow him to, when Messi was leaving, and they didn't renew Messi's contract or Ramos's contract. They wanted a new era under Luis Enrique. Neymar, yeah, you can go too, as long as we can get some money back for you. That was the case, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And beyond that, I don't think there was any sort of real sadness that Neymar was leaving the club. I mean, when he was on the field, there's no doubt he performed well. If you look at his goals to game ratio, it's pretty impressive. In terms of what he provided the team offensively, was pretty impressive. But there was never that connection there with the fans. There was never that real sort of affection for Neymar that, say, a Kylian Mbappe has. And I guess that's kind of driven just purely because of his attitude. We saw towards the end of his stay at Paris, fans actually protesting outside Neymar's house, and they had kind of picked him as the poster boy for to take out their anger after a really mediocre season. And I guess that Neymar was kind of seen as somebody who kind of summed that up. And that's been the case throughout his career at PSG, because of his general attitude and comportment of himself, I guess. I mean, it was just a struggle towards the end of his career, and there was absolutely no heartbreak really that PSG were able to sell him. And of course, getting 90 odd million from the Saudi Pro League, from Al Hilal, to sell him really, really softened the blow for PSG. That was you mentioned Coutinho as being a good bit of business, but it's transpired that 90 million for Neymar has also been a very, very good bit of business from PSG's perspective.
Yeah, it was not a good piece of business from Al Hilal's perspective. He played half a dozen games there.
You talked about Coutinho being the worst transfer earlier, but I think Neymar to Al Hilal, I think that probably edges it now.
Yeah, it could be. And he, at the time as well, Neymar had hoped perhaps to stay around in Europe and maybe sign for a big team in Europe where he could still win the Ballon d'Or, but everybody was put off by the transfer fee or even his wages at the time, because to be the best player in the world, he had to be the best paid player in the world, and he was one of the best paid players in the world, and nobody around Europe was kind of willing to pay any more, as we've seen, because of so many injury issues, and we saw them crop up time and time again in Saudi Arabia. They were right not to pay the money for him at the time. Obviously, he's come back at Santos, and he's like a new man. He's like a child again, playing for Santos and scoring there. But in Saudi Arabia, these injury issues kind of came up, and one of the first things he said after signing for Saudi Arabia, he thought maybe he could be kind of one of these new stars at Ronaldo and Benzema over there. He said, I wouldn't be surprised if the Saudi league is better than the French. And yeah, that was another way to please those PSG fans that you had been with for the past 6 years.
Yeah, for sure. And we've seen that from Ronaldo as well. It may well be that in a year or two that the Saudi Pro League is stronger than Ligue 1, but I think it's still got a way to go yet in terms of the strength and depth of its teams. Yeah,
and we're still seeing some sort of fallout from this. Like we mentioned, this Neymar deal it's 8 years ago at this stage, but in 2024 there was an investigation launched by French police over unpaid tax or alleged unpaid tax, 88 million worth. That's part of what you mentioned in the overall fee, because there was an investigation at the time because the 88 million wasn't paid. They claimed it should have been paid because he was essentially buying himself rather than the club buying him, that this should have been kind of a personal liability rather than the team's liability. So there was an investigation. Haven't seen the results of that, but probably nothing is going to happen there. But it's still the case that this transfer is having big kind of ramifications on and off the pitch. And on the pitch, we're still seeing it Liverpool versus PSG in the Champions League at the moment, that Dembele is trying to score for PSG, and Alisson in the first leg of the Champions League, the money that they got from Neymar, he's the reason they beat PSG.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I guess if you think about Neymar's arrival at PSG kind of triggered the sort of second wave, the second era of the QSI's time at PSG, and I suppose his departure was marked by Nasser Al-Khelaifi, the PSG president, saying that this is the end of the bling bling era at PSG, and it has proven to be that way. You know, we saw Neymar leave. A year later, Kylian Mbappe has left to Real Madrid. Now, that might not have been a deal that PSG necessarily wanted to be concluded, but when you look at PSG's performances, particularly in the second half of this season, and we're speaking in the morning after the Champions League loss against Liverpool, but there's no doubt that PSG are now a better team than they were with your Messis, with your Neymars, and with your Mbappes. So, you know, the ramifications of this Neymar deal have been felt throughout the footballing world and do continue to be felt throughout the footballing world. But at PSG, it's turned out that arguably they're better without any of these guys.
Perfect. What a way to end the show. You've been listening to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you liked what you heard, please follow, share and rate us. Your support helps us bring you more news, analysis and insight. You can message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter and Blue Sky address is at TransfersCast. Robin is on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky at Bairner. I'm on Twitter at Paul and Blue Sky at Ronan Murphy. Our production is by Mark Caulfield and our music by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening and watching.
He did the transfer window. Ian McGarry, who left us and wasn't known for a couple of years. Duncan was low. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. 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 Where everyone's gonna go.